ever been shaped by somebody else's words? Like you took in a moment and just thought about them and they yanked you out of a stupor of incoherentness, or a stupor of not knowing, and they brought you to a place of knowledge acquisition and the application of it. Well, this week I will be delving into 3 great Greek philosophers. You have probably heard their names in classrooms, in TED Talks, in YouTube channels, and today you're hearing it on my podcast. I'm going to be talking about the legacy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Welcome to the Legacy Table. I am your host, Nachasa Kimberly. Now, in today's episode, as I have mentioned, we are going way back when. Way back when mentorship was not about careers, when mentorship was not about competition, when mentorship was not for the acquisition of a following, but when mentorship was just a relationship among 3 great men. In my, how do I put it? Research. Okay. In my research, I came across these 3 great men. I've already mentioned them. And while I'm going to be focusing mostly on their story, allow me to shift your eyes just a little bit into the origin of the term mentor. Now, many of us think mentor is an English word that was coined by the English to refer to a guide or a teacher. But the word mentor actually first appears in the Greek play by Homer called Odyssey. Now, in this ancient tale, King Odysseus of Ithaca sets out for the Trojan War, and behind he left his wife and a young son called Telemachus. In his absence, the king entrusted his son to the care of a friend. Guess what the friend was called? I'll give you time. Yep, his friend was called Mentor. This was something very interesting for me to find out, in all honesty. In fact, I just laughed. I laughed because part of the reason why I went to look for the origin of this word is because of a person I'm related to, not by blood, but yeah, a person I'm related to who's completely obsessed with anything Greek or Roman or ancient, just ancient stuff. So he kind of made me go in that direction, and voila, I found the origin of the word mentor. So Odysseus was gone for a full decade, and obviously he had entrusted his son to his friend, but his friend didn't necessarily help him. So guess who showed up? Goddess Athena. Now, I'm not here to even go into the nitty-gritties of gods and goddesses that we used to be around, but Athena is from the word Athens, and Athens obviously is in Greece, so hence Greek mythology. So Athena used to take on the form of mentor and helped in guiding and shaping Telemachus as he grew up. Given that the king of Ithaca had been gone for a long time, Athena helped Telemachus in confronting the many suitors who came around his mom, and within all that they were able to secure the kingdom of Ithaca. From this myth, therefore, is where the word mentor was born. It refers to a guide, to a teacher, to an advisor, and over time it has also been allowed to include the idea of a reciprocal relationship with real costs and real benefits for both mentor and mentee. And the reason why I'm very keen on this is because we need to understand that a mentor-mentee relationship is kind of like a give and take. So while there's the idea of passing over knowledge, it doesn't just occur up going down. It is an idea, an exchange of ideas, and you'll see it even as we delve into the story of Socrates, Plato and Aristotle. At its core, mentorship involves problem solving, it involves active listening, it involves also role modeling. So the idea of mentorship allows these two people to shape core values, to shape attitudes, and to shape behaviors in such a way that they align towards one goal. In another research paper that I read, it brings about the idea that mentorship is aligned towards a specific goal. So you need to have a goal even as you're mentoring or receiving mentorship. It also calls for the evaluation of strengths, of abilities, of interests, and identifying potential weaknesses within these two people. In the past, mentorship was unidirectional, or it was geared towards one way of thinking, but over time it has evolved to a place where it can go into different directions. That means that one person can have maybe 2 or 3 mentors, because I don't believe that one person can give you everything that you need. As I've constantly said, mentorship is a journey, and in this journey, as I've done a little bit more research, I've realized that it comes in 4 stages. Okay, so we have initiation, we have cultivation, we have separation, and then we have redefinition. Okay, so in the initiation process, obviously, is when you're being introduced to your mentor or introducing yourself, or vice versa, whichever way. So introduce yourself, understand what are your core values, understand what is the end goal, understand what are the boundaries, and that sort of thing. And then when it comes to cultivation, obviously that is self-explanatory. It would be that you build a relationship. At the core of it, mentorship is to build a relationship. Okay, a relationship that is reciprocal. So it's not just give, and the mentee just receive. No, it is give, receive, the other person gives, receives. So it is an exchange of ideas. So you need to form a bond, because you can't mentor or receive mentorship from somebody with whom you don't have a bond. Then we have separation. That is where eventually the mentee gets an autonomy of how they think or what they want to do with the information that they have, and they slowly separate from the mentor. Not that the mentor cannot always reach out, but it's just that now you have gotten to a place where you are fully formed, so to speak. And then we get into the redefinition, which is basically a transition from teacher-student to maybe teacher-student. And I'll give an example of this. Is when you have a professor, you have the dean of students, and you have a professor, and then you have a student. So the dean has moved over to a higher calling, and then we have the professor who's receiving some mentorship from the dean, but then the professor is also offering mentorship to a student. So it's kind of, as I've always said, mentorship is a staircase. So allow me to now delve into the juiciest part of this podcast today, which is Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They lived out the life of mentorship. And I think that in this day and age, we need more of people like these. I think I was reading somewhere I've read different stories of different people who've been mentored, but let's just stick to this before I go into other people. So Socrates by trade was a sculptor, by calling he was a philosopher. Okay, so Socrates used to carve out sculptures in ancient Greece. As a philosopher, one of the things that he mostly emphasized was that the truth lies within us. And he did this through a teaching method that I think still works to date, which is a Socratic method. So this one basically involves learning by asking questions. And I'll give a perfect example, and then I'll add mine. So there has been a debate over time whether the earth is flat or round. There are people who insist that it's flat. I don't know why. But there are people who know that it's round because of proven facts. But you see, if you were seated in class and nobody ever asked you that question, you just go by what you were told. But Socrates, in his time of philosophy, he encouraged the asking of questions. And let me just throw a question. This is something that has been on my mind for a couple of months now. We know that the earth is 70% water and 30% land. So how is it that the population of the earth is constantly increasing, but we're still living on the same land? That's just something I was thinking about. And of course, I've applied the Socratic method. So Socrates was a firm believer in the idea that the more questions we ask, the more knowledge we get. He did not believe in simply doing as you're told. So much so that the reason why Socrates died, and this actually shocked me, was because he was accused of encouraging the young people to rebel. So in ancient Greece at that time, the Athenian leaders did not believe in being questioned. And it was so severe to the point where when they lost the Peloponnesian War against Sparta, they decided to crucify Socrates because he allowed his students to constantly ask and answer questions. So now his students were not just doing this within the confines of his classes, but they would also ask these questions out in public, sometimes questioning leaders, which is something that's happening in this time and age. It's still a philosophy that we abide by in this day and age, where it's okay to ask questions, okay? And I firmly believe that as a mentor, you should allow yourself to be asked questions, because it's the only way that you will know more than what meets the eye. I think that we are living in times when we can no longer just believe what we are told, but it's okay to go in the search for knowledge, because it makes us wiser, it makes us more knowledgeable, and even makes innovation much easier because we're constantly asking questions. Well, guess where that method came from? Socrates. Following his death, Plato decided to respond to Socrates' death with a lot of writing. He rejected the idea of democracy. Not that democracy was wrong, but he believed that if democracy was not just, then it would only lead to more chaos within the earth. So to build on this philosophy, Plato proposed this way of thinking. He thought that what if leadership had 3 tiers? So his proposed 3 tiers were the philosopher kings, who led with logic and wisdom. And then he had the idea of warriors, who basically just defended the society with a lot of courage. And then there was the producers, whose work was to keep the economy going, or to keep the demographic going. So they provided food, shelter, and clothing. Plato, one of his greatest achievements was building a school called the Academy. And the Academy brought together future thinkers who explored the different ways through which leadership could be handled, so that it was not just do as you're told again, but it was, can we question a few things? Can we change a few things? Can we innovate new ideas? And guess who was the greatest beneficiary? Aristotle. So Aristotle, his stand was a little bit different because he believed in balance. One of the key emphasis of Aristotle's philosophy was that you do not need to do things in excess. If you did things in excess, you were just greedy. So Aristotle believed in having just enough. He encouraged the idea of observation and logic, which were concepts that would later influence how science was viewed. Aristotle was very rooted in the idea of observation because he believed that when you are able to observe systems, when you're able to observe democracies, when you're able to observe different mechanisms, and even when you're just able to observe nature and some of the laws that govern nature and science, then you'd be able to come up with your own hypothesis or with your own way of thinking. And in turn, it cemented the idea that Socrates had already talked about, where the truth lies within each and every one of us. Where if we applied critical thinking, then we could come up with new innovations. Where if we applied active listening to what was going on in our environment, then we could actually come up with different ways of solving common societal problems. Aristotle, when it came to government, thought that the best model was power shared, not hoarded. So he believed that aristocracy and democracy, when combined, would give the best way of leadership. And this was actually adopted by the people who came up with the American Constitution and some parts of Europe. Their ideas were mainly drawn from what Aristotle wrote. Now, when I look at these three great philosophers, yes, they were from Greece, yes, they were from ancient Greece, if you want to call it, but they were able to shape how we view leadership. They were able to shape how we view thinking. They were able to shape how we view even the truth, because some of the things that were going on then, things like dictatorship or things like the lack of autonomy or the I would say even slave trade, people began thinking for themselves. People began exploring new ideas. People began looking at life from different lenses. And even science, in its very essence, evolved through the ideas that were presented by Aristotle. The legacy of these three gentlemen, in my opinion, is a legacy of mentorship and a legacy of leadership that holds to this very day. As I think about this podcast and as I think about even what I tell people every day, I would like to be founded on facts. I would like to be founded on things that were there then and are still going on today, or have been amended or have evolved. But where did they originate from? It's because of stories like this. I don't know if you have a relationship like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. I don't know if you have a mentor that challenges you or guides you or even advocates for your interests. I don't know if you have mentees who you're working with, but I hope that even as I have told the story of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, that it will inspire you, one, to think more critically, two, to allow your thoughts or your ways of thinking to be challenged, to be guided, and to be refined, so that you can be like Plato, you can found your own academy, or you can be like Aristotle, you can allow people to innovate from the very foundations of science or from the very foundations of philosophy. Or you can be like Socrates. You can die because of what you believe in and leave a legacy behind. If this has been one of those podcasts that you have really enjoyed, feel free to either mentor or be mentored, because it is a legacy that cannot be taken away from you. I have been your host, Nachesa Kimberly, and this has been the Legacy Table. Thank you for coming here.
Mm-hmm.